This is Space Minds from SpaceNews. In this episode of Space Minds, staff writer Sandra Erwin sits down with General Shawn Bratton, Vice Chair of Space Operations for the U.S. Space Force, for a fireside chat at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg Center. In the next installment of the Center's Discovery Series, they explored where the Space Force is headed for 2040, the debate over refueling satellites, and how Bratton came to join the military.
I'd like to invite Space News' senior staff writer Sandra Erwin and Space Force General Shawn Bratton, the Vice Chief of Space Operations, to the stage. Please give them a round of applause.
Good
How we
evening.
doing?
Hello everyone. Thanks for being here, and it's great to have General Bratton here to talk with us, talk about Space Force 2040, the future fight. First, I would like to welcome General Shawn Bratton, Vice Chief of Space Operations for the U.S. Space Force, the service's second highest ranking officer. He helps guide how the Space Force organizes, trains, and equips forces. And prior to becoming Vice Chief, General Bratton served as Deputy Chief of Space Operations for Strategy, Plans, Programs, and Requirements, overseeing the service's strategy, force design, and resources. So before we get into the Space Force, I don't think a lot of you know General Bratton's story. I mean, what a journey you've had, General Bratton. Given your story, you left college, you thought you'd be a musician, but then you went back to college, you joined the military. Did you ever imagine that you would be Vice Chief of the Space Force?
Hey, no. Sandra, first, great to see you. Always glad to be on stage with you. Thanks for sitting down with me. And hey, everybody, how's it going up there? Are we the end? I saw the previous panel, always intimidating to go after Dennis and John Plum and Suzanne. I mean, that was really good discussion. I could have listened to those guys for another 40 minutes. And so if there's people here I know I can't see you, but hey, good to see you again. And for the people I don't know, great to meet you. It's not a personal interaction kind of thing, but I'm super humbled and honored to be here. Thanks for coming out. I don't know if it's mandatory for some of you to be here or if you had the option, but if it's mandatory, I'll do the best I can to make it worth your while. You can judge me the whole time. And if you chose to come here, thanks for coming out. We appreciate the advocacy, not just for the Space Force, but for the whole mission area, for talking about space. For those of you in the business, thanks for what you're doing. I mean, it's incredible every day what's going on. So just sort of rambling opening comment. To get to sort of your question, it has been a crazy journey for me to end up on stage with you tonight. I started just as a young 18-year-old. I went to college right out of high school in Phoenix, Arizona. Went to Arizona State University, and I was not prepared. My high school prepared me well academically, but maturity-wise, as an 18-year-old boy, I was not there. And I really did think I'd be a great musician, or maybe I was a mediocre musician. I thought it'd be great. Played in a band, attended bar, went to school. Found out no one really cared if you went to school when you're in college, so I dropped out of school for a little while. Arizona State was actually good with that based on my grades. They thought that was a good idea too. And my dad had served in the military, and he, this is my first semester right out, and I knew that report card was coming home, and they were paying for my tuition. That ended pretty quick. And I knew I had to get a plan. I didn't know what to do, and so I knew enough about the military, and I ended up joining the National Guard to kind of cut to the chase. And as an 18-year-old, E1, the most junior rank you can have in the military, I went off to basic training, and it was just like all the movies, guys yelling at me on the bus to get off and pick up your bag, put it down. And from that, it really shaped me. And I went out and I came back and I got my degree and was still sort of part-time in the military, taught high school. I was actually a high school teacher, a degree in education. But the military kept pulling me back in. Eventually I went full-time and through a whole bunch of good fortune and hard work, ended up putting on my 4th star probably 6 months ago now. And when General Saltzman pulled me up, yeah, thanks. Super nice of you to say, but definitely there was not a plan there at any point in my life. It was, just head down, working on the job that I had, just like you guys do every day, and then people really opening doors for me, and so it's great. Yeah, it's fun being a 4-star general. I mean, it is. It really is. Not every day in the Pentagon brings me joy, but it's pretty good. It's pretty cool, and I'm super proud and humbled to serve, and I really feel like, hey, my job is open doors for people, help lift them up, just like my leaders did for me, and so yeah, that's how I got here. Pretty crazy.
Well, that's a terrific story. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
And very inspirational. So I guess I know the panel before us, they spoke a little bit about the Space Force, but it's really always good to remind people that a lot of what the Space Force does is not visible day to day, but it underpins almost everything that the US military and the global economy rely on, which is missile warning, communications, intelligence, GPS. So I think with that as context, General Bratton, maybe I wonder if you can look at the big picture and talk about how you see space fitting into today's national security environment. When you look at the threat environment, how does space fit into the broader national security picture? And maybe can you share a little bit of a historical perspective about the role that space plays in our national security and how that role has evolved?
Yeah, that's a lot.
A big question, yeah.
There's a lot in there. I guess maybe a way to tackle something that big is sort of what are we thinking about now? And I did listen carefully to the team that was out here in front of me. And so what are we thinking about now? What are the problems we're trying to solve? I mean, there is this change that we're all feeling that's happened over several years, that part of which was the establishment of the Space Force. And so there's certainly, we're in what feels like a sort of pivotal area. For a couple of years, inflection point was the term in vogue that we use. But, I mean, we really are in this. There's a lot going on, both in commercial, in civil space, in military space. And so in the Space Force piece of that, we've sort of got our legs under us through the establishment stuff. Like, we've got most of the organizations. We've figured out training. I mean, there was a couple of years there of just, how many buttons are going to be on the uniform? Oh, we should have 6. Why 6? Let's have a meeting about that. By the way, it's because we're the 6th branch of the military. That's why there's 6 buttons on my jacket. But there was, we didn't just decide that like that. John Plum was probably key to that. That was a policy question. No, but we're through all that. We're through the birthing of the Space Force. There's still more to do, but much of that work is behind us. And really, that enables, time for thinking and time for discussion about things like dynamic space operations and what does the Space Force look like in 2040 and what are the challenges. There are many, not that we must take on, but which ones do we have the capacity to take on of all the things that we could or should do. And so right now that discussion, I mean, we're really focused on the warfighting piece. I mean, space superiority, we published some great doctrine this past year on space warfighting, how we think about space superiority, the activities needed to gain and maintain space superiority, the space control mission area, the equipment we need to do that, how we do training, just all the straight military warfighting stuff. Tons of work on that. Really, really proud of what's going on out there. And now we're infusing that down to the lowest levels. We sort of got our minds around, what does this fight look like? How do we think about key terrain? What is a fight in low Earth orbit? How is that different from, combat effects in GEO? And those are 2 very different activities. Lots more to do, but the warfighting piece, we've really put a lot of energy and prioritized that, obviously, because it's the military. I think that has been a very threat-driven, body of work. We are responding to what we're seeing and what the Joint Force, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force is demanding from the Space Force. And in some ways, the other services have really pushed us to go faster, do more. I mean, the Navy, maybe more than anybody, even our parents in the Air Force, the Navy has really realized that the threat and how they're held at risk by being observed from space. And they have really demanded from the Space Force capabilities and warfighting capacity that didn't exist before. So they can be successful in their mission. They understand that dependency, I think, in some ways better than the Space Force does. So a lot of work in the warfighting piece, a lot of work in how does the Space Force fit into that joint force? What is the space contribution to the fight, not as a support mechanism providing ISR or communications or navigation and timing, but how is the adversary using space to find Navy ships at sea, and what can we do about that? So that is the right now work that I feel good about, that we've made good progress on. When I look at what we're not doing, because we're focused on that, that list is long. The more on dynamic space operations. Where are we going with refueling? How does refueling, what is the military advantage for refueling? What is the civil and commercial advantage for refueling? It's a very different, refueling in space is very different than refueling an aircraft, so you can fly further. It's a totally different thing going on there. More about, I would argue, life extension than, combat advantage in the fight. So ships and planes, refueling for them it means a very different thing. Many would argue that point with me, by the way. But we're not, thinking more about that. Where are we going with cislunar? What are we doing beyond GEO? What is the demand signal out there? What do we need to be doing right now to prepare ourselves for that future operating environment that is beyond GEO? We're thinking about that a little bit, but we should be thinking about it a lot right now. And some of that is just capacity. We're small and we're focused on, first things first. Keep the main thing, I keep telling the staff. And that is, delivering combat capability. So, but we should be thinking about cislunar. So I'm really hopeful that, you guys are all thinking about cislunar. That when you're here at Johns Hopkins or in academia, or those of you, who are in the Space Force who are going to school here, you should be thinking about this while we're paying you to think. And bring that back to the service, right? Bring that back to the service. Those of you in industry who are, there's a lot of companies going to the moon right now. What is the national security implications of your work, and what do you need? What do you someday from the Space Force? Start to demand that, or at least help us think through that. Beyond cislunar, we're not thinking about that at all in the Space Force. We're not thinking about, and I really wish we were. We're not thinking a lot about humans in space and the impacts of that on warfighting. There's some corners where people are writing small papers about it. What is I heard maybe in the previous panel a brief mention of sort of military astronauts. Where are we going with that? The answer is I don't have an answer to that. It's on the to-do list. We haven't got there. Do we need to put human guardians in space? Man, it would be tragic if that didn't happen. Someday, is that day 2030, 2040, 2050? I don't know the answer, but we owe work on that. But again, we're very focused right now on the near term body of work in space superiority. So there's some things out there. There's probably more that we're not addressing. But what are we doing right now? Really focus on space superiority, the equipment, training, people we need. What do we need to be doing coming up? All those things I mentioned, probably many more that I haven't even begun to scratch the surface on.
Yeah, that's a huge portfolio of things that you have to do, not just to support the joint force, but also to compete with China and other rival powers. I guess maybe I'd like to ask you about resources. We just saw the new funding bill drop yesterday for the Department of Defense and the Space Force, and Congress seems to really support the Space Force and all your goals. However, do you think the Space Force is sufficiently resourced to do everything that, the priorities, not necessarily the wishful thinking stuff, but the stuff that you have to do now? Are you sufficiently resourced for that? What are some areas that maybe you would like to see some growth?
Yeah, I think we've been doing well. If the measure is, did you get more money this year than last year? We're doing well on an upward trend. I think I'm more, and for a while our narrative very much was we need to double the Space Force budget, triple the Space Force budget. I worry more now about the people and infrastructure side of that equation than I do just the how much is in the appropriations bill for the Space Force. And those are tied together. You get people, you got to pay them. So it all eventually comes back to budget. But I worry more about, we're bringing on a lot of work. Do I have the program offices on the acquisition side to be able to develop those capabilities and field them? Do we have the test training, infrastructure to be able to really wring those capabilities out? Do I have the operational, not only just the number of Guardians, do I have the places to operate it from? What can we automate? How do we go faster? And so I worry more about the infrastructure and personnel side of the resourcing these days than I do the, what's in the approps bill and how do we do. I think we're well supported when we present a plan that makes sense to Congress, to OSW, to OMB. I think our planning on the personnel and infrastructure side, and we have a ton of work. I've really been driving this year, that looks out 5 years, 10 years, 15 years on, how big is the Space Force in 2040? What do we think we're going to be flying? How much of that will we automate away? If we automate away, how do I develop a junior workforce into a senior workforce? Because our entry-level jobs are flying spacecraft. And so, we're working through some of those. I think the personnel piece, we're in pretty good shape. I do think, we will double the size, the number of people in the Space Force in, not while I'm still in, but within the next 5 to 10 year time horizon. We're at 10,000 military today, 5,000 civilians. It doesn't hurt my head at all that those numbers would double. On the infrastructure side, we have a lot of more work to do there on what is the infrastructure we need to be able to operate all those capabilities to support and sustain those Guardians. And so there's work ahead of us on that front.
So you mentioned the objective force, looking at 15 years. Are we going to see that? I mean, is that something that you will release to the public? Can you share any insights on what we're going to see in that document?
Yeah, the terminology, just to baseline everyone, the terminology we use a lot, sort of common in the joint environment. People talk about the objective force. Usually that's 15 years out. It's the force you need in a given time, so 15 years in this case, against what you think the threat environment and the operating environment is going to look like. So in 2040, what does the Space Force need? And usually people talk about that in terms of capabilities, not how many tanks or planes or spacecraft, but I need the ability to navigate in cislunar, to communicate in the cislunar environment. I need to be able to command and control spacecraft beyond the moon. Those sorts of things would be in the 15-year time horizon. And then as we move that through, sort of as it gets closer, eventually you have to program it. So we use the term the program force. That's what we've actually are spending money on. So the program force goes out, it's really like 7 years from now. So across the FIDEP is the program force. And then the fielded force is what you have. And so General Saltzman's been talking a lot about the objective force. Hey, what do we need in 2040? We're working hard with SWAC, the Space Warfighting Analysis Center, soon I think to be the Space Warfighting Analysis Command, to elevate up. We had talked a lot about futures. I think we have the plan now with Secretary Mink to bring that together, and they're on the hook to deliver this objective force. In the meantime, in my last job, the boss was like, until they show up, Shawn, you got it. Write this document. And I failed completely to deliver that to him. And then he promoted me. So yeah, I don't know how that works. But there's a couple pieces to that kind of feed into it. One, do you have the intelligence and understand what the threat environment is? And that's inputs from all across the IC that come in. Do we understand just the operating environment? So what does commercial and civil look like in the 15-year time horizon? Are we on the moon? Are we around the moon? Is there navigation? What capabilities? Understanding sort of what that body of work is. And then you can really start to get into the military piece of that. And so, I mean, when you start to wrap your head, to do that well takes time, takes smart people. And so we're after it for the boss, and he's very demanding that we got to deliver this. We're just not quite there yet. I think we're starting to get a handle on that operating environment piece, and that is sort of step one of this. By the way, it has to tie to what's the Army, Navy, Air Force need from us in 2040. It's not just space for space. And so there's a lot of communication with those teammates. But we're pulling it together. We'll see it in 26. I think, or you won't see me on stage here next year for sure.
Well, a lot of people in the commercial space industry, I guess, are really interested in hearing more about that or seeing more details on that, because a lot of the companies that are investing in space technology, maybe they don't really understand what the military needs. And so perhaps that objective force will give the industry a little bit of guidance and context as to what you really need from the private sector.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because if you think of, if we went back 15 years and wrote an objective force document for 2026, it seems like, if you go back 15 years, it would have been totally different. But most of the stuff we have today, we had 15 years ago. It's not that different. And so if you build that in as an assumption, hey, our force 15 years from now is probably going to be everything we got today and then some new things, right? But there's not, even our newest stuff isn't that new. The GSAP 2007, time frame, that's like one of our new high-speed capabilities when you compare it to missile warning and GPS. And so now we have iterated technology in missile warning and navigation and timing, but it's the same capability that we've always been providing. So I'm trying to say we're still going to be doing missile warning 15 years now. We're still going to be doing satellite communications. We're still going to be doing precision navigation and timing. I think we'll be doing a lot more space superiority activities than we are today. I think how we do those things, is the interesting discussion. What will satellite communications look like? Will we have, direct to cell from low Earth orbit? Will we all be on laser comms? That is the nuances of the, industry. Where do you guys think we're going to be? Are we going to be, we're going to all make that push over to laser comms? Is 5G from space going to deliver next year, the year after? I mean, certainly by 15 years from now, we'll be well through that and on to the next thing. But so I think a little bit of the messaging to us from the boss is, hey, don't make this too hard. We already know a lot of the answer because a lot of it is what we have today. It's really these new fringe cases. What's the new thing that comes in? I think for sure, 15 years from now, we have to have the cislunar stuff up and running and going, probably to a pretty good extent. That's probably the newest in our sort of area of operations. We will expand to that. I think that seems pretty clear. I think refueling will be here in some way, shape, or form. I don't know how much the military will lead that or be in trail. I talk about I'm on the one end of the spectrum on refueling, and so where I think it's less likely the military is the leader of that, but we'll see.
When you say you're on one end of the spectrum, meaning that you don't really believe the military should take the lead on that?
I can hear John Shaw yelling at me
Yeah.
right now. Here's how I think about refueling. It goes back to the airplane analogy. There's a clear military utility to refueling an airplane. It extends the range so I can go further to fight. And it lets me come home and bring that pilot back if it's a manned aircraft. That use case does not really apply to space. But satellites going around the Earth, regardless of the fuel state. And so refueling doesn't extend the range of a spacecraft. It extends the life of a spacecraft. Okay, so that's still good, but now put that in a war game and have a conflict where does life extension give me a military advantage over my adversary? It may save me a lot of money, and that may be the reason to do it. But if I put a refueling architecture up, now I have to defend that. It also introduces risk, and so I'm torn, and I have not seen in wargaming the military advantage during conflict that refueling brings to space. And then you get into a great debate about dynamic space operations. I think the best use case I've heard is It does give you advantage if you start the fight and all your gas tanks are full for your maneuverable assets. Acknowledged. I think that's true. I haven't seen the wargaming on it, but it feels like, yep, for maneuvering, you know, if I can fill the gas on all my GSAPs before we go to war, that's good. I don't know if that alone warrants the investment and then the defensive requirements that a refueling architecture for the military would take. That's my probably stance on it. I think there's great points on the other side, and I'm not certain I'm right. That's why I'm like, show me the data on refueling. We have a really good hand on the cost curve of when it becomes economically beneficial to start refueling a constellation. Has to do with the size of the constellation and the cost of each spacecraft. And so we're getting really good information on sort of when it makes sense for the economic reasons. I don't know that that's the exact same thing as military advantage.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be a very interesting.
You guys help me
debate
figure
going
that out.
forward.
I mean, I really don't know if I'm right, and there's a bunch of smart people here. So, you know, run some war games. Let me know.
Excellent. Well, there's a challenge for the smart people. here.
Guardians,
Yeah.
I know there's a couple of you
Yeah.
in here.
Great.
They're like, thanks. I wish I didn't come to this.
Well, let's pick up on, you talked about space superiority. You mentioned it a number of times here on the stage. You were involved in this, you mentioned the doctrine that the Space Force released in March 2025 that called the Space Warfighting, a Framework for Planners. That was the document. And this was something that got a lot of attention because you were addressing offensive operations in space, which I think the quote from you at the time when you spoke to us reporters, you said, you know, that protect and defend, that was what typically you were doing before, and you said, we're moving past protect and defend, and yeah, we're going to talk about offensive capabilities in space. So I guess I would like maybe for you to reflect on that, and what does offensive operations mean in space, and what do you want the audience here, the industry, everyone to understand better about warfighting in space and how the Space Force is thinking about it?
Yeah, I think, thanks. I can't talk about that. No. We've, over the years, and for good reasons, we've tied ourselves in knots to not say certain words. And so we used to say contested and congested. We still use that phrase a lot. Contested. I mean, the congested part, there's a lot of stuff up there. Contested. We're fighting over something. And then we came out, when I was at U.S. Space Command, we wanted to sort of move the needle a little bit, so we came up with protect and defend. There was an era where we were all running around saying protect and defend. Well, I mean, it's still like us trying not to say offensive actions in space, weapons in space, you know, any of the things. And then finally we just saw, you know, we got over it and we said, hey, first up, there's just warfare in the domains. You know, there's not just war in space or war in air or land. And so there's warfare, and in warfare, yeah, you have offensive and defensive actions. To gain and maintain space superiority, we conduct space control activities. Those activities are broken down into offensive and defensive activities. You know, electronic warfare is the easiest thing to talk about. You know, people jam our stuff all the time. We employ tactics to overcome that. We try and employ capabilities to deny their ability to use space on the offensive side. And so it's just sort of the same thing the military does everywhere else. You know, we're trying to do in the Space Force. So it's, well, why do we need to do that? Really two reasons. One is, you know, they're coming after us in space and we got to defend our stuff. That really takes, the defensive side is that there's a lot, and you guys have read about it all, but, you know, directed energy, grappling arm spacecraft, you know, potential nuclear weapons, and all the things that they're coming after us in space to take away our space capability in a fight with the United States. But they're also used in space just like we are for satellite communications and navigation and timing and missile warning, to enhance their terrestrial forces just like we do, air, land, and sea, to make the adversaries' air, land, and sea capabilities better. And the Army and the Navy and the Air Force need us to do something about that. They're like, hey, we we're going to fight in the air, and the adversary Air Force is using space to gain an advantage, and you, Space Force, this is your job to do something about that, to take that advantage away. And you do that through offensive operations. And so if the adversary is using space to gain advantage in air, land, and sea, if they're using space to negate our space capabilities, this is the only reason to establish the Space Force. I mean, the military really exists just to fight, or to have a military to prevent the fight from ever happening, in the deterrence theory side of it. But I mean, that's what it comes down to. And it's, kind of once you put that out there, it just makes perfect sense. Well, of course you would have offensive capabilities and defensive capabilities. Otherwise, why have a Space Force that's part of the Department of War? You got to have that stuff. Yeah. And so that's what we do.
Do you feel like the Space Force is investing now in offensive capabilities that give you reason to think that you're prepared for a conflict?
Yeah, I think we're looking at all the threats that we're facing, that we see, that you guys have read about in open source, and we have to deliver on or be able to deny that threat. Some of them are very, very difficult, and will take a lot of effort to be able to overcome or to take something away from the adversary. Some of them less so. Some of them I need to go back to the Air Force and the Army and Navy, like, you guys got to help us out. This can't be a space fight for space, sake. If I need to deny the adversary's ability to command and control their spacecraft, the easiest way to do that is to bomb their command and control facility. And that is, Air Force, Navy, Army's business. And so some of us is working better with the Joint Force and being demanding of them, like, hey, I'm not just here to give your SATCOM and your GPS and all this stuff. You got to work for me just like I'm working for you. And so, yeah, we think about all those things. We're standing up those service components out in the combatant commands to really help us understand, what does that joint fight look like? What is the important space piece of it that they need from us, they being, the air, land, and sea components, and then communicating back, and here's what we need from you. We're all in this together.
So you mentioned electronic attacks, which is something that we hear about every day. GPS being a primary target of jamming and spoofing. So is that electronic threat what you're worried about the most now, given how prevalent it is? Or is this something that now you accept that it's happening, and perhaps you're worried about other threats that would be more severe than that?
Yeah, I think, I don't know which one, it'd be hard to say which one we're worried about the most. There's a bunch of bad stuff out there, we're worried about it all. I think the electronic attack stuff really presents a dilemma, again, that, help us think through this is, what is the threshold? Like, we tolerate a lot of GPS jamming around the world. We just, every day, we're just taking it, satellite interference, intentional satellite jamming. I think we need to be more disciplined in how do we think about that? Is that just, that's okay, you can interfere with someone's navigation and timing. It's okay until it interferes with a commercial aircraft and a plane crashes. It's okay if you only do it to the military. It's, like, how do we think about that? I think that we just now sort of accept it as that's just how it is out there. If you're anywhere in Europe and because of the Ukraine fight, you're at risk. It happens all around the world, not just there. But I don't know that we've gone back and really established, well, what are I'm trying not to use the word red lines because I don't know if it's that dramatic, but what are hey, we're not going to take this anymore, or we're going to respond in kind, or is it, nope, you can jam GPS, it's okay, we're going to let you get away with that. Jam our links to our aircraft or our RPAs or any of those things. Jam commercial satellite. I mean, this will drift into, two companies start jamming each other for some economic advantage or industry advantage. Who resolves that other than the FCC or the ITU? And so I think there's thinking in that area that we haven't done, that we sort of at some point need to go back and clean up our act on. All right, what is the policy on the military side, what's the policy for the country? What should international norms be for electronic interference?
Is cyber a separate category of threat in the sense that, we hear a lot from the commercial industry that sometimes the military doesn't trust commercial systems because they're not secure the same way that military systems are. So what is your thinking about cyber threats and how to maybe integrate more with commercial?
I think the cyber threats are real. It is sort of, General Whiting with the soft underbelly. That makes me think of all sorts of weird things. Sorry. I think it's a vulnerability. I don't think it's necessarily true that the military is any better or worse than the commercial is. Some people are good at cyber defense, some are not. I think it deserves more attention and resources than we give it.
Yeah. So picking up on this idea of use of commercial technology, we saw the Space Force come out with a commercial strategy in 2024. Then you came out with an international partnership strategy in 2025. So obviously, it's a big theme in the Space Force to partner with industry, with allies. So as you look at that today, where do you think the Space Force is making real progress, and where do you think is still falling short in translating the objectives in those strategies into actual practical results?
Yeah, I think the commercial strategy, I think there's continued progress, much more to do. I think, and that drifts into everything from acquisition reform. I mean, we're doing a ton of work on that right now. To when we talk about using commercial or how the Space Force accesses commercial, it's always a little weird for me because we're not building any spacecraft in the Space Force. We're buying them all from industry. So on one end, everything is commercial. Like it's we're going to the primes, we're going to the small guys. Everyone's building stuff for us, which is great. So it's all commercial. Normally, what people mean is, well, like commercially operated, like we're buying as a service. And we're thinking hard about that. What does that mean? If I'm buying, commercial missile warning, just for example, what does that mean in my interaction with U.S. Space Command and Combat Command? Like we're working through some of that. I think there's places where it makes tons of sense, and we're doing good work. I think there's some places where we're going to draw some lines and say, nope, we're not commercializing space superiority. That is a military function. We're going to keep wearing a uniform. Does that mean when you go to that ops floor, there's not a contract force there supporting us? There's always a contract force there supporting us. So even that is commercial. So I think I worry less about trying to really define it in the box and hey, use everyone to the advantage, to gain the advantage, to go fast, if I don't have the Space Force is too small to do everything. If we can outsource a mission area, I'm all about that. Let's outsource the mission area up until the point where, hey, this is a warfighting function. You need to be a uniform doing it. And so help, challenge our thinking on that for sure. I think when you get into areas like weather and navigation and timing, could commercial do that? Yes. Is there a business case? That's commercial tell me, other than selling it to the Space Force. Because then we're back to where we were. So, I wandered all over the place there, but that's what was in my head.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
Hey, no, that's good. That's good.
There's a guy up there thinking he would have been better off in a band. I think.
I mean, I have to ask you, what do you make of all these procurement reforms that are coming out of the Pentagon? I mean, they came out with all kinds of reforms, commercial first, you have to go faster, no more of the 10-year programs. The secretary's been very critical of the traditional way of doing business. So where is the Space Force going with this?
I'm super excited about it all. If we can realize the dream, right? And some of this is, there's a lot of work to do with Congress on authorities for money. We want to give the acquisition workforce authorities with regard to funding and things like that. But some of that is withheld by Congress. So we can't be downing in on this. We got to build a team that all wants to do acquisition reform. I think Congress absolutely does. the department absolutely does. We just got to find common ground and execute on it. I'm super excited about this. I caught the end, I think John said right at the end, he was talking about acquisition workforce and operational workforce and how we blend those. I mean, we're doing some pretty exciting things along those lines to build operators who really understand acquisition, acquirers who really understand operations, and pretty soon you can't tell the difference. I think General Saltson's really pushing us to, hey, tear down all those walls. Take engineers, make them operators, and then have them do acquisitions. Then maybe they come back to ops and move back and forth. I think all of it is good. And I'm excited about it. Yeah.
Yeah, General Purdy has been talking about, some new architectures that they're coming out with commercial. You think we're going to see a lot of that moving this year, fast?
I think some of the commercial, we still live in the reality of, I'm in a great big Department of War. We still got to work with Congress. No one's going to let us just go do everything we want to do, nor should they, even as much as I wish they would. But there's some things we got to work through. Everybody's got their favorite thing, and sometimes they get very protective of it. It's hard to let it go. I'm sure I do that too. So it's a little bit about, hey, how do we break down all the walls to include the walls around rice bowls that people are protecting?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. General Bratton, really appreciate you being here with this fascinating discussion and sharing your insights. And please joining me in thanking General Bratton. And afterwards, please go to the reception outside.
Thanks, Sandra.